Don't ask me why. This is what I decided to wear for the video. It's red, it's the Bulls, whatever. I kind of like it. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today's video is a special bonus video, once again, because I said earlier in the week, sometimes there's going to be stuff that's going to happen that I'm just going to want to make a video on out of schedule. I did it earlier this week, and it happened again today because I woke up this morning, typical day, some crazy games last night, and I look at my phone, and the Chicago Bulls have decided to fire Jim Boylen. And honestly, I haven't seen a single Bulls fan on Twitter or otherwise that isn't extremely excited about this. Pretty much everybody in the basketball community was on the same page that Jim Boylen no longer needed to be a head coach at the NBA level. So what does this mean for the team moving forward, and how does this impact the Chicago Bulls as a franchise? Well, let's get the obvious stuff out of the way here. This was something that always needed to happen. I knew it, everybody else knew it. When I talk about the Chicago Bulls in the past handful of videos, including the most recent one in which I kind of made an application to be their new general manager when they were undergoing their search, the first step in the plan every single time was to fire Jim Boylen and to find an actual coach. Now, what does that do for this team? Well, think about where the Suns were a year ago, excuse me. They didn't appear to have too much of a future. Their young core was questionable. Yes, they'd gotten some young players. They got DeAndre and they got Devin Booker, but their head coaching situation was completely up in the air coming into this season. We start this season and the Suns look like a pretty decent basketball team under new head coach Monty Williams. He brings a professionalism. He's just a good, solid NBA coach, which they hadn't had in a while, right? Then they kind of fall off a little bit, and then you get to the bubble, and suddenly things look completely different for Phoenix now than they did just a couple of months ago. As a result of an 8-0 stretch in the bubble, they look like a competent basketball team. People's opinions on the Suns and Devin Booker specifically are changing drastically, and all it took was a change in head coach to allow them to grow and develop their young players, and now their outlook looks way more positive than it did a couple of months ago. That exact same thing can happen for the Chicago Bulls if they bring in a head coach that will properly develop the young talent that they have on the roster, because they do have good players. I don't think that the struggles in Chicago are necessarily a lack of talent problem. Are they going to be a top team in the Eastern Conference with this roster? No, but it's not like they don't have the talent to make the playoffs. And honestly, when you're looking at some of the teams at the bottom of the East that did make the playoffs this year, not the bottom of the East, at the bottom of the Eastern Conference playoff picture, it's kind of sad that the Bulls weren't at least in the mix there. So let's go down the list. First is going to be Zach Lavine, of course. Is he going to be as good as Devin Booker? No. Does anybody think he's as good as Devin Booker right now? No. Am I super high on Zach Lavine? No, I'm not. But I do think that if you bring in the correct coach, we'll talk about some candidates a little bit later on, he can worst case provide some really good trade value for you, and best case he can be the second best player on a team that's at least pretty good in the Eastern Conference. That's where I'm at with Zach Lavine. I don't think he can be your top player if you want to be, like a top 4 seed in the Eastern Conference. I just don't think that's realistic given his limitations as a player. But really, for me, the two guys that I really like on this roster, as I've said multiple times, are Lauri Markkanen and Wendell Carter Jr. Those are the two guys that I think drive the development of this team more than anybody else moving forward. I think it's a little bit more difficult to find front court players with the ceiling and the skills of those two guys rather than a backcourt player with the similar skill set of Zach Lavine. I think it's more difficult to find those big guys that are like that. Markkanen had an awful season, and I think if someone was impacted most directly by the Jim Boylen effect, the negative effects of Jim Boylen, I think Lauri Markkanen is that guy, and I would not be surprised if he has a big bounce back season next year. He's a supremely talented offensive player with great body control. The defensive stuff is always going to be kind of an issue, but he's a great fit as a complementary scoring option for a team, and I think we're probably going to see a bounce back season for him, assuming they get a quality head coach, which again we'll talk about a little bit later. Wendell Carter Jr., his problem has just been staying on the floor. If he's healthy, he's going to be an Al Horford type player for the majority of his career. In my opinion, he's just going to be a solid big guy that has some skills, can hit the mid-range jump shot, maybe extend his range out of the three-point line, and be a really good defender and rebounder. And that is a valuable skill set to have in such a young player that does have the ceiling that Wendell Carter Jr. does. Apart from that, they've got other pieces on the roster: Chandler Hudson, Otto Porter Jr., Daniel Gafford, whatever. You can talk about the guys on the fringes, but the three main guys here obviously are Markkanen, Carter Jr., and Zach Lavine. And then the big X factor for this group that I think could either push Zach Lavine out potentially or just flame out, because we don't really know if his second half of the season performance was legit or not, is Coby White, their draft pick from last year. I still really like Coby White. I think he's going to be a good player. Whether he turns into someone that helps you win basketball games a lot, I don't know. But I do think that he has the skill set to be a good scorer and potentially a pretty solid defender as well with his quickness, if that's something he wants to commit to. So those are the 4 guys, right? Like, you've got the 3 core guys that we kind of know where they're going. And then you've got Coby White, who is a huge wild card for this roster. Now, moving forward at the head coaching position for the Chicago Bulls, they've got the front office figured out. They've got a new configuration there, and I think it makes sense to, with that new group, bring in a new head coach as well. And the name that keeps coming to mind here, and I understand that I'm biased, but I also have a lot of experience with this coach, is Kenny Atkinson of the Brooklyn Nets, formerly the Brooklyn Nets. And everything that this Bulls team needs, I think Kenny Atkinson is really good as a coach. Is he a fantastic in-game X's and O's, drawing up plays at the end of games and out of timeouts coach? No, he's not. But what he can do is he gets guys to play well. He gets guys to play hard. He gets players to play above their talent and their skill level. And he has a great system for developing young players. I've seen it over the last couple of years in Brooklyn. Joe Harris came to us as pretty much nothing. I think he barely played a couple of minutes for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and now he's one of the best shooters in the league. Now, credit for that goes to Joe Harris, of course, but also the development system in place there in Brooklyn has been fantastic over the last couple of years. Jared Allen, Karis LeVert, Spencer Dinwiddie, you can keep going on and on and on, and we've seen what that has brought Brooklyn with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving joining the team, and I think that is really the path here for Chicago, bringing in either Kenny Atkinson or someone with a similar skill set to develop the young talent on the roster and make them look like a much more intriguing free agency destination as a result of those young players. Because again, the core of this team, even if they reach somewhere around their ceiling, is probably a top 4 seed in the Eastern Conference, but they're not going to be championship contenders, right? So how do you make that jump? How do you bridge that gap? And I'm sure a lot of Bulls fans right now are probably like, well, I mean, I would take being top 4 even if we're not a contender. That's fine. And I get that. But if you're really, going for the fences here, you need to be able to bring in some free agents. And it's Chicago. It's a great city. It's a historic franchise within the NBA. You should be able to get big time free agents. And I think the way you do that is you make sure that your salary cap space is clean moving forward. You develop your young players to make it look like a promising Brooklyn-esque situation, and then you go from there. So if it was me, I would be advocating for Kenny Atkinson or someone similar, but ideally Atkinson would be in play. There's already been rumors that he is someone that is in the mix for the job. I think he would be a fantastic fit. And if they did that and they brought in Kenny Atkinson, what day is today? Today is the 14th. I wouldn't be surprised if on August 14th next year, we're talking about a completely different outlook for the Chicago Bulls, whether it's because they traded away Zach Lavine for some pieces and are going younger, or Coby White, Lauri Markkanen, and Wendell Carter Jr. have big seasons and they're kind of a fringe 8-7 seed in the Eastern Conference. Zach Lavine is still there, maybe, still scoring a lot of points, looking like a valuable player or valuable trade asset. I think anything that they do in terms of a change at the head coaching position, which they've already done, but if they bring in a quality coach like Kenny Atkinson, I think their outlook could be completely different. And I think the 2 parallels here to the situation in Chicago are Brooklyn as it relates to having young talent that needs to develop, and if they do, becoming potentially an interesting free agency destination. And Phoenix is the other parallel as it relates to Monty Williams coming in and completely changing things there for Phoenix, and the outlook looking completely different now than it did last year for the Suns. So I think that is kind of where this Bulls franchise is going moving forward and why this was such an important thing to have happen. And honestly, I almost made a video like a week or 2 ago because there was a rumor saying that they were going to keep Jim Boylen for financial reasons. And I almost made a rant video about that. So I'm glad to see that they came to their senses. I don't want to offend Jim Boylen as a person, but as a head coach, it wasn't going to work out. And I don't know why Chicago ever thought that it would once he was named the interim coach. I don't know why he was ever brought back in the first place. I've already said all these things on the channel, but the Chicago Bulls are looking for a new head coach. And if they pick the correct one, there could be some very positive things happening in Chicago over the next year, and that could potentially turn into some big things moving forward. They've still got plenty of pieces to move. Otto Porter Jr. is there. Zach Lavine is still an asset. They've got their pick. They've got Coby White. They have the making of something potentially really positive in Chicago, and I'm very interested to see what they're going to do with that group and how they're going to cultivate this talent. And again, I would advocate for someone like Kenny Atkinson to come in there and do that. And yeah, there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.